might find this hard to believe, but labor unions shrank under Biden and have actually grown under Trump. Right? Union membership hit an all-time low in 2022, then hit an, I guess, even aller time low in 2023, and then the allest time low in 2024. Is that how English works? That left about 14.3 million workers in unions by the time that Trump put his hand on the Bible and said,
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
And then, of course, his hand caught on fire. He then flew into the sky and said, the Epstein files are a hoax. Excuse me. Sorry, it's been a very long week and I've been sick. But then, over the course of the following year, as one of the most labor-hostile presidents in modern American history shredded worker protections, union membership reversed. Over the ranks of organized labor growing by over 400,000 in 2025, bringing the total number to 14.7 million and pushing union density up by a tenth of a percentage point to 10%. And actually, when you count workers who aren't members of a union, but they're still covered by a union contract, that number hit the highest level since 2009 at 16.5 million. And so that brings up the question, well, is Biden actually a corporate shill and Trump a working class champion? Well, no, it's actually quite the opposite, right? A big part of the reason for this shift is that the labor market was doing pretty good under Biden and it sucked shit under Trump. I believe that's a technical term. But there was the post-pandemic recovery, and even through 2024, the US economy added 2.2 million jobs. So non-union positions grew faster than union ones, pushing their relative share down. But then last year, you had the labor market growing at its slowest pace outside of a recession since the early 2000s. So unions grabbed a larger share back. Though also, I definitely need to clarify that you can't just boil this shift to changes in relative percentages. Right? There was an absolute decline in Biden's last year and a rise in Trump's first. That actually seems to have more to do with the tireless work of labor organizers and less to do with anything that Trump can take credit for. But he's been ruthless toward workers. He cut down the federal workforce by some 300,000 people so far. For those still there, they've described feeling fearful, hopeless, and stressed the fuck out as he stripped them of protections. Right? One of the places we can start is with Trump taking away collective bargaining rights from over 1 million federal workers at over 40 government offices covering roughly 2/3 of the federal workforce. That was a move where you had a labor historian calling it the largest and most aggressive single act of union busting in US history, even worse than Reagan's infamous assault on air traffic controllers.
They have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
But it didn't stop there, right? Because Trump also ended automatic payroll deductions of union dues, which deprived them of funding. And in fact, as a result, the American Federation of Government Employees had to lay off 30% of its staff in August. The next up, you had several agencies canceling their contracts with federal unions, as well as several more fighting lawsuits to get their contracts canceled. And then to talk about something more recently, last week you had the White House telling those agencies, hey, don't even wait for the lawsuits to finish, just end the contracts now. And in the face of these relentless attacks, you had public sector union membership growing throughout last year as tens of thousands of federal workers joined to defend themselves. And understand, that's just with the federal workforce. There's another war that's being waged in the private sector. Right? And there, yes, Trump has less direct control, but he's still causing a lot of damage. And so, for example, you had him purging the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, with him then trying to refocus its attention on white discrimination.
Are you a white male who's experienced discrimination at work based on your race or sex? You may have a claim to recover money under federal civil rights laws.
Also, you've got OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, not in great shape, with Elizabeth Warren and 5 other Senate Democrats writing a letter to Trump's labor secretary complaining that there were 20% fewer worksite inspections between April and September compared to the same 6 months the year before. Meanwhile, the inspections that were carried out, 42% fewer found willful violations, which is a category that carries some of the highest penalties for employers. And the agency has lost nearly 300 employees since Trump took office. Right, and actually with this, you have experts warning that OSHA already did so few inspections before this, and since it can't investigate everything, its effectiveness as an agency depends on deterrence. And so now they're worried that employers are just going to go, well, fuck it, who cares? We'll break the law. The odds of getting caught and held accountable, they're so low anyways. Plus, the Trump administration has repeatedly signaled that worker protections are on the chopping block, or with it closing offices that protect coal miners, revealing plans to stop requiring proper lighting at construction sites, and moving to ease evaluations of protective equipment for workers regularly exposed to dangerous chemicals. And then it's the same story with the National Labor Relations Board, whose chair Trump fired without cause for the first time in the agency's 90-year history. And so for most of last year, the board didn't even have enough members to perform its normal duties. Right? And then you compare that to Biden's NLRB, which aggressively enforced labor laws and went after huge corporations like Amazon and Starbucks for illegally union busting. In fact, during Biden's term, filings for union elections doubled and union victories reached their highest level in a decade. But also with this, I do want to note that if you pull out, it's not as simple as like Trump bad, Biden good, it's all the now. The erosion of organized labor in the United States, it predates either Trump or Biden. But back in the 1950s, nearly a third of all workers were represented by a union. Today, it's just like 10%. You know, there are a lot of reasons for it. A few of the big ones being the shift toward a service economy, the proliferation of right-to-work laws, and the general rise of neoliberalism since the 1970s. I mean, you even had public support for unions falling to an all-time low of 48% in 2009, right at the peak of the Great Recession. But also over the past decade, it has roared back, reaching 68% last year, which is really a level we haven't seen since the early 1960s. But also, notably with that, if you break it down by political party, it becomes a little more complicated. Support shot up to 90% among Democrats, remained steady at 69% among independents, and dropped to 41% among Republicans. With support increasing across all 3 groups compared to 2016, though Republicans, their peak was in 2022 at 56%.